Okay guys, so we're going to talk about the age of exploration. We're going to finish it up, specifically talk about the outcomes, the impacts, and the results of what happened. But I do want to start by covering a few of the explorers. We've talked about a couple of them. Prince Henry the Navigator, he is from Portugal. He opened up a school to train people how to voyage and explore, and he studied that. He wasn't actually an explorer himself. Christopher Columbus was an Italian who sailed for Spain. Remember, he convinced King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella, the king and queen of Spain, to pay for his journey, and he made 4 voyages to America and thought each time he was kind of landing in Asia. Vasco da Gama is from Portugal. He was the first to kind of reach Asia by going around Africa, and he found the first water route there. And remember, that's what all the Europeans were looking for a quicker route to Asia. Ferdinand Magellan was from Spain. We mapped out his course. He sailed around the world. Don't forget about him. A few more explorers here. Sir Francis Drake, very interesting guy. He was from England. He claimed land for England, North America. He was basically like a pirate, which is kind of neat. And he would steal stuff from the Spanish. And eventually the Spanish got really tired of that and decided they were going to invade England. And that was a big deal because the Spanish Armada, the Spanish Navy, were some of the biggest and strongest ships in the world. The English ships were much smaller, but it turned out that to be a benefit because they were very quick. And Sir Francis Drake led that, or helped lead that resistance and defeated the Spanish Armada, and that put England on the map and allowed them to become a major world player at that time. Amerigo Vespucci, real quickly, he was an Italian, and he made great maps, was very good at accounting for details of the New World, and he was able to kind of prove the New World was in Asia. And the Americas were kind of named after him. His name is named after a Latin phrase, and that Latin phrase is kind of named after America, so it's kind of named after him. So let's talk about the outcomes, like what happens because of the age of exploration. We've hinted at these before, let's really dig into them. One of the earliest ones was a treaty. We had to pass a treaty between Portugal and Spain. The Pope from the Roman Catholic Church decided to kind of settle this up and gave Latin America to Spain, Brazil, Africa, and Asia to Portugal. And he drew an imaginary line down the map. It was called the line of demarcation. And Spain and Portugal were supposed to honor that, and they could have those territories. Obviously, that didn't really work out. It was tough to do, but that was one of the big kind of things that come out of the age of exploration. The Native American impact, we've talked about this a lot. The Spanish defeated 2 massive empires, Inca and Aztec. They were 2 huge Native American empires at the time that the Spanish took down. Many of them were enslaved, but even more were killed by the exposure to European germs and diseases. We've talked about that, the idea of smallpox killing a lot of those innocent Native Americans just by the exposure. I'll get out of the way here. This board's got kind of a lot to it, right? Also, Africans. The Portuguese controlled the coast of Africa, and because of that, they started to enslave Africans and force them into labor. Initially, they went to work on sugar plantations in Brazil, in the Caribbean, and eventually this led to the transatlantic slave trade, what is we also know kind of as like the triangular slave trade, right? So Europe came down to Africa, they forced slaves to become slaves, they sold them to the New World in the Americas, and then they went back to Europe with goods, and they kind of did this triangular thing here. And this ultimately is the reason that we had the Civil War in America, because of this trade bringing slaves over to America. This was about 350 years before that war actually happened. And the Americans at the time were still practicing slavery. And so that was because of the transatlantic slave trade. A little bit further impact here, Europeans started to trade back and forth between their world and the New World, Old World, New World, and this exchange of goods and resources and ideas is called the Columbian Exchange. We'll go into that in more detail. And this idea of European countries taking over places became this idea of imperialism. Or colonialism, if you will. They divided up other countries, took control, and when they created the colonies, it was called colonialism. Also, you had this new economic policy called mercantilism, and that meant that basically a country has to gain as much money as possible. That's the idea of mercantilism. They do whatever they can to gain as much money. And kind of all of this together, this blue, became known as the commercial revolution, as people tried to generate cash, create economies, and that was a major impact of the age of exploration. So that's the end of our unit on the age of exploration.